Welcome to episode 5 of Nittany Sports Now's Victory Again podcast. I'm Joe Smeltzer, joined by Brandon Walker, both of Nittany Sports Now. Penn State's bye week for the 2022 season is over, and Michigan week is here, and this is a big one. The Wolverines are ranked number 5 in the AP poll, number 4 in the coaches poll. Penn State is ranked number 10 in both polls. Both teams are undefeated. Both for big-time college football programs. It's a big noon Saturday kick on Fox, and it is undoubtedly both Penn State's and Michigan's biggest test thus far. Brandon, what are some of your general thoughts coming into this game? And what are some things that you know and have seen from Michigan so far in this 2022 season?
Well, like we said, they haven't had that much competition besides Maryland. However, it's a classic Jim Harbaugh team. You have this kid, Jj Mccarthy, sophomore, looks like he can sling the ball. You have Ronnie Bell at wide receiver, who had 11 catches last week, and you talked about Blake Corum, who rushed for another 100 yards last week. So you have a nice, balanced team. Both teams are talented. I looked at the recruiting rankings from 24/7. I looked at for Tyler Caracero's article today. Everything's about even on both sides. The key is going to be number one is it's going to come down to quarterback play, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a very intriguing point you made, Brandon. So Sean Clifford, for whatever Penn State fans think about him, and a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. I don't want to beat that into the ground more than it's been beaten into the ground by Penn State fans, both this season and in 2021 and 2020. But if nothing else, Sean Clifford has experienced, and Sean Clifford has played in big games. Jj Mccarthy, who you mentioned, on the other hand, Jj McCarthy is like a heavyweight boxer who's crushing everybody, looking good, has a lot of big expectations, but he hasn't really played anybody that can punch back yet. And you could probably say that for this Michigan team as a whole, because their schedule has been a joke. And that's not a nice way to put it, but that is an accurate way to put it. You look at who they played: Colorado State, Hawaii, Connecticut in non-conference play. Then Maryland's a decent team, but Maryland just lost at home to Purdue, so beating Maryland by 7 at home isn't too impressive to me. And winning at Iowa stinks. That doesn't impress me too much. And then winning at Indiana and not looking too good doing it doesn't impress much either. But there's players on this Michigan team that have been battle tested. This team won the Big Ten last season, as we know, made it to the playoff. But Jj McCarthy wasn't the starting quarterback that year. And that's not a knock on Jj McCarthy. I think he's a very good quarterback and is going to get even better as time goes on. He was a 5-star recruit for a reason, but Jj McCarthy has not battle tested the way Sean Clifford is. Sean Clifford, to go back to the boxing analogy, he has been in big time fights, right? And he has played defenses that can punch back. He's played teams that can punch back, and Sean Clifford has punched back against these teams. And that's something that Jj McCarthy, frankly, hasn't really had to do yet. So that's a big thing to think about heading into this game. Is Sean Clifford against Jj McCarthy? I don't really know who has the edge, because it's really kind of the guy, the game manager versus the guy that has the big upside, which is Clifford's the game manager. McCarthy has the upside, but Clifford has been battle tested. McCarthy hasn't been. And that I think Penn State has an advantage in that regard. I don't know if it has an advantage at the quarterback position in general heading into Saturday, but they definitely have the more experienced guy running the offense, I think.
Yeah, they do. And plus, he definitely has not faced the secondary that Penn State has. Penn State has made one of the best secondaries in the country. So, and they have the pass. They can match up well against Michigan, but it's just going to come. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a more nip and tuck game. It's just going to, like, I know it's going to make sure Sean Clifford has to be efficient and he has to be not only a game match, he has to be a little bit above a game manager in this type of game.
Yeah, and we talked about Jj McCarthy not being as experienced, but this is the biggest test that Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in that running game have faced in their careers as well. Uh, so I think Penn State's recipe, and we'll get into keys and predictions later on, but Penn State's recipe is to do what it did at Auburn. And I know Michigan is a lot better than Auburn. We know that, but it's still the same concept of going into a tough environment and winning a football game. And Penn State's recipe against Auburn was simple: run the football, run it well, have efficient quarterback play, have Sean Clifford complete most of his passes, and win yourself a game. And I think that's what Penn State's going to have to do at Michigan. And that's going to be its recipe for success against Michigan. And I think it's recipe for Minnesota and Ohio State as well. But talking more about Michigan, Brandon, you mentioned Blake Corum, and Blake Corum is the heartbeat of Michigan's offense, bottom line. No question about it. Last year, he was splitting reps with Hassan Haskins. He's the man this year, and he is taking the ball and running with it both literally and figuratively for this Michigan offense. 735 yards, 11 touchdowns, 6.2 yards per carry. You know, what can you say? That's really good. You mentioned Ronnie Bell is an experienced receiver. I'll watch out for him. Michigan's also had a guy, Luke Schoonmaker, the tight end, step up in the absence of Eric All, who's usually Michigan's number one tight end, but has been banged up. Then on defense, a big guy Franklin mentioned was Mozzie Smith, a guy who Penn State recruited heavily back in the day, but Franklin called Michigan's defensive lineman the anchor of that defense. So that's kind of a brief synopsis of what Michigan can do. Michigan's defense is tied for 5th in the nation in sacks. Penn State's pass blocking has been pretty good this season thus far, only allowed 7 sacks through 5 games. But Olu Fashanu and that Penn State offensive line, they're going to be facing a pretty daunting task Saturday. And a big key, as always, is going to be to make sure Sean Clifford does not hit the ground.
Yeah, make sure he doesn't hit the ground and make sure he doesn't turn the ball over. Even though he only had, don't get me wrong, besides all the turnovers against Northwestern, I mean, those are the only turnovers they had besides the interception return, right, at Purdue, as far as I remember.
That is correct, yeah.
Yes, okay. So I'll give that, I chalk that up to the weather. I chalked all those turnovers up to the weather. They haven't fumbled the ball. Yes, you got to keep him upright, but more importantly, no turnovers. You can't turn the ball over against Michigan.
So you mentioned your key to the game earlier, Brandon. I think my biggest key is obviously you have to maybe not stop Blake Corum, but at least neutralize him. You can't have this guy going for 180 yards and expect to win a game. That's not going to happen. But if you hold him to under 100, maybe even play with fire and get him in the low 100 range, you have a shot. But what would worry me as a Penn State fan, Brandon, is the tackling ability and the play of Penn State's linebackers in general. We talked about it all through spring, all through training camp. How good is this Penn State linebacking core going to be without Brandon Smith, without Ellis Brooks, without Jesse Luketa, without some of those guys from last season? And unfortunately for Penn State, I think not many of those questions have been answered. You know,
Abdul Carter, he answered a lot of it. But
yeah, Elson and King, and James Franklin referred to both of those guys by name, and he didn't really downplay their performance. He didn't say, he didn't flat out say these guys aren't playing very well, they're not getting the job done, because obviously no coach is going to say that. But what he basically said in his 2-day presser is that, these guys came into this season without a lot of college football experience, but that's not an excuse anymore. They've played 5 games. They kind of have to step up, and, inexperience is not an excuse for them anymore. And Franklin kind of led on, to me at least, that he hasn't been pleased with his play at Mike linebacker. And frankly, I wouldn't be too pleased either. You can take Pro Football Focus ratings with a grain of salt, but I think when your rating is in the low 50s or below that, that's a good sign that you're not playing very well. And Elson's is in the low 50s. King is below 50. That's not good enough. And I think when you're playing a team that likes to run the football a lot, and you're missing tackles and not playing well at inside linebacker, that's a dangerous recipe. And we kind of saw that in the first half of the Auburn game. I know it's easy to forget because Penn State only gave up 6 points in the first half and won 41-12. But going back to that game, Brandon, you watched. We both watched. They missed a lot of tackles in the first half, and they let Auburn move the ball. And luckily for Manny Diaz's defense, it bended but didn't break. So it wasn't a problem against Auburn. But Penn State's got to get better, especially at inside linebacker. You mentioned Abdul Carter, Brandon. That's a good call. He's been very good. But I think a true freshman like Abdul Carter, he's a guy who you want to be a depth piece early on. Like, for example, we've all been pleased with the way Penn State's defensive front has played, but Nittany Dennis Sutton has been a depth piece for that defensive front. He hasn't been a big-time player on that defensive line yet, and I mean that in a good way because you shouldn't be expecting true freshmen to be big-time players. I think Singleton and Allen are a bit of an exception on offense, so we can have a whole separate episode on that, but the difference between Sutton and Carter is that Abdul Carter is at this point expected to be big-time, I think more than he should be, more than would be ideal for a true freshman, whereas Sutton can kind of, blend in and get his reps without having that pressure on him, if that makes sense.
I hear you. No, definitely, yeah. Yeah, that's the one place that you don't want to have, no matter what test of time want to be your middle of the defense, is your middle linebacker. That can't be your biggest question. That's what concerns me about this game, to see they have to make tackles, they got to make plays. We probably skimmed past it because they beat the crap out of Auburn and they didn't score that much. So, but Saturday, it's gonna be a big time focal point. I mean, tackling, being disciplined at the gaps, and they have a defensive lineman coming back. Izzard, right? Coming back.
Yeah, he played against Northwestern. He's a big depth piece for sure on the interior of that defensive line.
But I think it's going to be more up to big number 97 to make sure you control and make sure they get these guys off these middle linebackers. That he's going to be a piece for them. Beeman, defensive lineman. It's going to be the real big boys up front.
Yeah, and I would say. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, because I think Michigan has the best offensive line in the country.
Yeah, and that offensive line definitely made a lot of headlines last year, especially for the way it dominated Ohio State. I mean, my gosh. But you mentioned Jj Mustafar, and Mustafar is playing back at a high level. Obviously, got hurt almost a year ago to the date at Iowa and missed the rest of that season. But he's come back and he's been himself, I think, for the most part. But Penn State's best interior defensive lineman, I think, has been Hakeem Beeman. Has a Pro Football Focus grade of above 70, which is excellent. He didn't start, and I'm not sure why he didn't start against Northwestern. Devon at least got the start, but I think within the first few plays of that first drive, Beeman was out there, and Beeman made his presence known for the rest of the day. So, Brandon, my biggest key and my number one concern are kind of go hand in hand. My biggest key is for Penn State to tackle well, and my biggest concern is that the linebackers won't really allow the team to tackle as well as it should collectively. But Brandon, what's your biggest concern for Penn State headed into Michigan?
Like the middle linebacker. You got to be able to tackle, be disciplined, because you can't break off 5 to 10 yard runs consistently or you're going to lose the time of possession, and that's a hardball game. And another thing is, can the receivers make a play, make consistently paid? I'm not saying they haven't done a good job this year, because number one, they didn't really have to, because they were up in a lot of games, factor in the weather and stuff like that. But they have not. At the wide receiver core, we have not had a total effort. I mean, with Clifford, the wide receivers got to have to make a play. Rather it's Washington, Tinsley, Trey Wallace or
we don't know if Keandre Lambert-Smith is going to play.
Yeah,
That's
yes, him too.
storyline.
Yeah, because he said he might play. Most likely, you interviewed him. You was at the Zoom meeting today, so you would know a little bit better than I would. But somebody on the receiver corps is going to have to help Clifford out, making a play. It can't just be, as much as we love them freshmen, you can't just depend on them two to just break 170 yards or break 150 yards. And you know they're going to probably try, more than likely, double team Strange. So Parker Washington, you're on these lists. They're putting you as a first round pick in the NFL draft. I watched do the look at the mock draft. You know, I like doing the mock drafts for Nittany's and stuff. See, they do this and scout the players. Mitchell Tinsley, this is what you transferred here for. Big time game. Scouts are looking at you. Yep. Time to make some plays.
Yeah, I think it's hard to kind of evaluate how Penn State's receivers have been, because on the one hand, we definitely expected better numbers from the receivers. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Washington, with what he was able to do, even playing behind a guy like Jahan Dotson for 2 years, Tinsley with what he did at Western Kentucky. I mean, his numbers were absolutely out of this world. 15 touchdowns last year, top 10 in the country in receiving yards. And nobody in Penn State's receiving core has had a 100-yard game yet. And that's something that I don't think anybody really expected for 5 games. But I think a lot of it is because Penn State has run the football better than we've expected it to. And kind of a drawback, a side effect, if you will, of that is that receivers aren't putting up the numbers that Jahan Dotson put up last year or that KJ Hamler put up in 2019. I could go on. But at the same time, you want to see more from the receivers. And there's a lot of variables, but the bottom line is you don't want it to become like, we know a big storyline until Nick Singleton broke 100 yards against Ohio was, when is the Penn State back going to go for 100 yards? It's been 14 games without a 100-yard rusher, 15 games, 16. Is it going to get to that point with the wide receivers? I don't think so, but we don't want to start keeping track of the amount of days it's been since Penn State's had a 100-yard receiver. And, obviously the more weeks Penn State doesn't have a 100-yard receiver, the closer we're going to get to counting down the weeks. So talking about the receiving core, kind of a weird thing in James Franklin's press conference earlier today, where we're recording, episode 5 of the Victory Again podcast from Nittany Sports Now on a Tuesday night. And James Franklin has his press conference every week on a Tuesday afternoon. Is they asked James Franklin if Penn State has a number 1 receiver, which they don't right now. He's not going to say that, but I think anybody who's watched would agree they don't have a number 1 receiver. But Franklin started mentioning his receivers, and kind of casually in passing, Franklin said Keandre Lambert-Smith will be back. And people kind of assumed when he said it that he meant that he'll be back against Michigan. Well, Franklin was asked kind of to elaborate on that later on in the press conference, and he gave his typical coach answer, we're not going to get into injuries, and he didn't give an exact timetable. But did Franklin tip his hand by accident and kind of accidentally reveal to Frank that they expect Lambert-Smith to play Saturday? I don't know, but that's going to be a big thing to watch, and there's going to be media at Wednesday's practice, and they'll see if Lambert-Smith is practicing. But having Lambert-Smith back, he's been underwhelming. His only, I guess, big play he's made this year was that touchdown catch against Purdue. But he's definitely, you'd rather have Keandre Lambert-Smith as your third wide receiver than Trey Wallace. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, because you should have him as your third receiver, but I think the Penn State does have number 2 receivers, a number 1 receivers capable of being number 1 receivers, but they just need. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, they just need the ball. And they just need to make a play when they have to make a play. That seems like besides the Purdue game, they just didn't have to make any sort of plays in order for you like because the other 4 games have been mostly out of hand. They had a handle on the game.
Yeah, there's a few ways you could look at the receiver situation, I think. Like I would say they don't have a number 1 receiver because there's nobody that separated himself the way Jahan Dotson did last year. So Penn State doesn't have a number 1 in that sense, but they have guys that are capable of being number 1. I think Parker Washington certainly is capable of being a number 1. Mitchell Tinsley definitely capable of being a number 1. Keandre Lambert-Smith, I'm not as sure about, but there's a few ways you can look at it. You can look at it in that way, or you could look at it that nobody has separated themselves. And I don't think anybody has separated himself as being the number 1 receiver on this team the way Jahan Dotson did in 2020 and 2021. Or another example at another position, I think this year is Brenton Strange. Going into the season, you were thinking, okay, Penn State has kind of an ensemble cast of tight ends with Brenton Strange, part of an ensemble, Theo Johnson, part of an ensemble, Tyler Warren, part of an ensemble. But now, Brenton Strange is the leading man, and I don't think there's any turning back with that. Penn State has a number 1 tight end, and Brenton Strange is that guy. Nobody has done that in the receivers room yet. And if I'm a Penn State fan, I'm more comfortable if somebody does separate themselves and becomes that number 1 guy. That's just me, though.
Yeah, I'd be comfortable too. I would think one of the 2 that you named would be good, but I think I'll be good with Brenton Strange being the your number 1 target. He could be your number 1 target, and you'll be fine. But yeah, you need somebody on the outside of that perimeter to start making plays in making Clifford better than he is, look better than he is. But I'll just say that. But that's just my concern. I just think they just have to prove it on Saturday, these receivers. So that's my number 1 key. I mean, would be my concern, but it's not really a big concern. Get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. All right, but as we wrap up episode 5 of the Victory Again podcast, let's get into predictions. I'll go first. So I'm at a weird spot right now. My gut is telling me that either Michigan blows out Penn State or Penn State wins a close game. But at the same time, I feel silly picking a Michigan blowout. So I'm going to go Michigan 24, Penn State 17. I think it's going to be a winnable game. I think it's going to be the type of game that fans feel a little sick about because, they'll be thinking, oh, if this play went differently or if that happened or if that was called correctly or whatever, then the outcome could have been different. But my main reason for Michigan winning, obviously playing at home helps and playing in the Maze Out helps. That place is going to be rocking, and I will be in the Big House press box Saturday, so I'm excited about that. But I think, as we mentioned, and I don't want to harp on this too much, but I don't know if Penn State's linebackers are up to the task of tackling Blake Corum and containing Blake Corum. I just don't know. And until the linebacking core, I guess, makes me more comfortable in their abilities, this is going to be a problem. And I think that Corum has a big game. I think Jj Mccarthy isn't amazing, but completes enough passes, doesn't make enough mistakes, completes a high percentage of passes, and he helps Michigan win too. So yeah, I'll go Michigan 24, Penn State 17.
Oh man, I thought we was going to do, everybody, the staff is going to do on Friday. I don't.
Well, we can do that too, but
yeah, that too, because this will be subject to change.
Yeah,
as we do research, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, I'm gonna say, what's the spread? 7.5.
7.5. Yep.
7.5 is the spread. I say Penn State covers. I have to do a little bit more research about the game and everything else. Do my research and stuff, and look at some film. I have to take the home team as well, and I'm gonna say 24-21. The only reason is the only reason why I say that is because if Clifford can have a play above the line, as in not just being a game manager, play at least like somebody that has the capability to say, he might have a future in the NFL. If he has that type of game, Penn State will win. I just don't think. I'm still on that. I still have that kind of opinion. You'll be like, you look at McCarthy and you look at Clifford, and you'll be like, man, I think he might rule the decision like at the end of the year and not take that suggestion that I did. So I'm taking Michigan because until Sean Clifford proves that he's has it enough against a great team that's equal or better to him, I can't go with him. So yeah.
All right, there you have it. For Brandon Walker, I'm Joe Smeltzer. Thanks for listening to episode 5 of the Victory Again podcast, watching and listening. And yeah, follow my personal account at Joe Smeltzer 775. Follow our site's account at Nittany SN. And Brandon, your Twitter account?
B Walker Dadon. B Walker DADON.
There we go. So yeah, follow us on social media and continue to read our content on Nittany Sports Now. Episode 5 of the Victory Again podcast has concluded.